Rent-to-rent contracts, you need to get them right because you're going to have to stick with it for the agreed term. Now, a lot of people get the contracts wrong, even some trainers even teach it wrong. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what contracts you need to use for rent-to-rent. Let's go.
So a contract is only really there if something goes wrong. You shouldn't really ever have to go to the contract. It should really be about, good communication with the landlord. But if something goes wrong, that's why you have a contract in place, so that you can always refer back to that if something happens.
Yeah, you can refer back to it and see what you actually agreed for that particular circumstance.
Yeah, and for that reason, it needs to be bulletproof, and it literally needs to cover everything.
So yeah, the contract is there to protect not only the landlord, but obviously yourself as well. So if your contract isn't correct and it doesn't protect you or the landlord, and it hasn't been checked over, and it's not legally enforceable, then what's the point in having a contract?
Pointless. So there's 4 types of different contracts that we've heard of, and there's only 2 of them that you should be using. But we've seen other mentors and just people teaching people to use contracts that you shouldn't use, basically. So
we're going to clarify this in this video.
Before we make this video, just to straighten things up.
So the right contracts are a must. As someone doing rent to rent, there's only 2 contracts that you're going to need. You're going to need one to sign with the landlord, because you're going to be doing a rent to rent of his property, and 2, you're going to need a contract for your tenants that you're going to be bringing in. But we'll explain about those in a second.
So first, we're going to run through the ones that you should never use. So the first one you should never use is an AST, which is an assured short hold tenancy agreement. That contract is what you have to give to the tenant when they're moving in. So if you have that with the landlord, you're basically a tenant, then you'd be subletting to other tenants, which is illegal. So that's why you should never use an AST contract.
Yeah, you might get it sometimes where an agent doesn't fully understand the business model and they think that giving you an AST contract to sign for your rent to rent is the right one.
Yeah.
So,
for example, we had an agent in Southampton who was trying to source a deal on for one of our investors. Then the agent was just basically saying, no, we only want to use an AST. We only want to use an AST. And I kept trying to explain to him that that's illegal and that would be called subletting. But yeah, he just was saying, well, the landlord only wants to use an AST. So I ended up having to get my legal guy to call them and just explain it to them so that they could understand it. So a lot of people, even that are in the game, or letting agents or landlords, even just anyone, might not know the right contract. So you have to be careful. You can't. If an agent just says, yeah, we'll do that on our contract, we want to use this contract, you still need to make sure you get it looked over by a professional.
Second one we're going to talk about that you should not use is a corporate let or a company let.
So when we first started even learning about rent to rent, just sort of trying to learn about it, didn't have any deals, that was the first thing that we were hearing. Oh, you need to have a corporate let, you need to have a corporate let, you need to say you're calling from a corporate let company. So that's what we thought it was for
ages.
Yeah, but so many people are teaching that at the moment, and that is
wrong.
Yeah, it's completely wrong to use that one.
Let me tell you why.
Yeah.
So if you're doing rent to rent, you're either going to be doing rent to rent HMO or rent to rent service accommodation. Now, the only time you'll be able to use a corporate let agreement or a company let is if the people that you're going to be putting into those properties are your employees. That is the only time you can use that agreement. The only time.
So obviously you're not going to be housing your employees, because when you're starting out you're not even going to have any employees, and when you do have employees you're not going to need to house them. So it's just a wrong contract, basically.
Yeah.
That would be used for a massive company that's like moving their staff somewhere for a few months or something like that.
Yeah, so if you're doing rent to rent, you're either going to be doing rent to rent HMO, rent to rent service accommodation. So the only contracts that you're going to use are AST contracts or short stay contracts. Those are the only ones you're going to be using with your tenants. But yeah, again, the tenants that you're going to be putting in those rent to rents are not your staff. So you should not have a company let with the landlord. You should not have a company let or a corporate let agreement with the landlord. So now we've cleared that one up.
Got it off my chest.
So now let's talk about the contracts that you should be using. We'll start with the ones that you're giving your tenants.
So the ones that you should be giving your tenants is a AST contract, as mentioned earlier.
For your HMO rooms, if they're going to be a tenant that's going to be living there and it's not a short stay, then that is the contract that you want to be using. So now you know what contract to use for your tenants. Let's talk about what contracts you need to use for your rent to rents. So the only contracts that you're going to be using for your rent to rents, so the contract that you're going to be signing with the landlord, is either a management agreement or a commercial lease. Now, a management agreement would be if you're managing the property and charging the landlord a fee. So when you're using a management agreement, you're essentially being a letting agent. So you're doing what a letting agent would do. You're collecting the rents, but you're taking your fee off. You're charging them a fee to do that.
So when you're charging a fee like a letting agent, you're going to fall into VAT much quicker, because rent isn't like, it doesn't fall into VAT, but management fees does. So that's something to bear in mind.
Yeah, definitely. So that brings us to the last contract, which is the one we recommend using for rent to rent, which is commercial lease. So a commercial lease, you're effectively becoming the landlord. You're not the landlord, but you're effectively taking control of the property as if you were the landlord. So you're now collecting the rents off the tenants, and you're then paying the landlords what you've agreed the rent's going to be for that property.
So it's legally subletting.
Yeah. So it all depends really on how your business is set up and how you run your business. So of course, if you are just managing properties, then obviously a management agreement might work best for you. If you're just charging the landlords that you're working with a fee to manage their property. If you're specifically looking to do rent to rent, then obviously that's not going to work. So what you would look to use is a commercial lease, and then that way you're collecting rents off your tenants and you're paying the landlord what you've agreed his rent's going to be, and you guarantee him that every month. So it's all, it all depends on how you run your business and how you've set it up.
If the property has a mortgage, it's likely the lender won't allow the lease. So in that situation, you have to use a management agreement, and if you are using a management agreement, you have to be compliant as a letting agent. Yeah, so guys, hope that's cleared a lot up for you, made it easier to understand, hopefully. If you have any other questions about contracts or what to use, what not to use, just drop your questions in the comments. All of our contracts have been written up and looked over by our legal guy.
Yeah, specialises in rent-to-rent contracts as well as other things.
Yeah, so he's an absolute rent-to-rent specialist. And yeah, if you want a copy of that, just hit us up on Instagram. Yeah, drop us a message.
So that just about wraps this one up. Remember, drop your comments, smash the likes. What videos do you want to see next? And see you in a bit.